and giving the gift of overlooking the transgression. So the power of forgiveness, or the act of forgiveness, is recognition that there's a flaw in all of us. Those of you that have read about Vaishnava etiquette and Vaishnava behavior, I think you will find that this makes sense. I'm trying to speak in a non-sectarian way about forgiveness, but if you think of it as an act on part of the transgressor and an act on part of the victim, where the act is centered around trying to develop a relationship, then I think you will see the potency of the act of atonement, a genuine atonement. So at this point, that was just an introduction. And like I said, I was going to speak from Mahabharata, chapters 30 to 32. So there are 3 chapters, and I'll just read the key sections that I noted because it's long. But it's very, very wonderful. And it's very devotional. So I request you to just close your eyes and just put down phone and everything else and sit down and just listen. As I describe through Vyasadeva, Maharaj Yudhishthira's experience upon completing the actual act of the battle. So please bear with me and listen. You will see the acts of his atonement and the acts of the forgiveness that came towards him. So Mahabharata describes that as after the battle, the Pandavas approached the Ganges because they knew that the Kuru clan or dynasty was mourning. And so as Maharaj Yudhishthira walked towards the Ganges, along with his brothers, he saw the Kuru ladies mourning. And as he walked towards them, they surrounded him and they were crying out. And some of them said to him, "Where's your righteousness, O king? Where is your truth and compassion? You have mercilessly slain our husbands and our sires, our brothers, our sons, and our friends. What is the use of being a sovereign king now that even your own sons and allies are dead? The war has brought nothing but grief to everyone." Maharaj Yudhishthira, the Mahabharata describes, passed silently among the ladies. Just put yourself in his shoes and imagine this. Yudhishthira walked towards Dhritarashtra, the king of the Kauravas, and bowed at his feet. And so did the Pandavas. And because Dhritarashtra was blind, they announced their names as they came and offered obeisances to the king. And Dhritarashtra had a heavy heart, obviously, because all of his children died. But he embraced Yudhishthira and blessed his brothers. And the brothers introduced themselves, as I mentioned. When he heard Bhima's name, however, his heart was burning with anger. But he concealed his hurt and anger, and he called Bhima forward so he could embrace him like he had done with Yudhishthira. Krishna understood what was in Dhritarashtra's heart and his intent. So he stopped Bhima from moving forward. And utilizing his energies, his mystic potency, Krishna brought forward the statue of Bhima that Duryodhana used to keep in his arena where he used to practice with his mace fighting. And that statue was made out of iron, and it was of Duryodhana. And Krishna pushed the statue into Dhritarashtra's arms because Dhritarashtra had his arms open, getting ready to embrace Bhima. And Dhritarashtra being blind, but the Mahabharata describes that Dhritarashtra had the strength of 10,000 elephants, and he was burning with anger. So he squeezed the statue with all of his power. This in that yuga, leaders were not like nowadays. They had tremendous physical and spiritual power. And he thought the statue was Bhima himself. And when he squeezed that iron statue, that statue shattered into many pieces. And Dhritarashtra himself was injured in the process, because you can imagine the strength it took to crush a statue made of iron. And so he started vomiting blood and fell down on the ground. And Sanjay, who was his ever-present advisor and aide, Sanjay is the one who narrated the Gita to Dhritarashtra. So Sanjay bent down and picked up Dhritarashtra, lifted him and said, "Oh my king, do not act in this way." Having released his anger, so this is the idea of forgiveness on this part of Dhritarashtra. Dhritarashtra was instantly remorseful, meaning saddened. And he thought he had killed Bhima. Once Dhritarashtra's anger settled down, Krishna said, "Do not grieve. I knew you were angry, so I dragged Bhima from being destroyed by you. You've only broken a statue, because who could escape from your angry embrace, which is the embrace of death? In any case, how would killing Bhima do you any good? It will not revive your sons. O king, give up your spite and your anger and be peaceful." And when Dhritarashtra heard this, because his heart was in this place where this anger had vented out of him, and Krishna's instructions penetrated into his heart. And so he was able to move forward with the gift of forgiveness. So as he was helped up to his feet by his servants, they took him to the river, and Mahabharata describes that they had to change his clothing and bathe him because he was bloody and his clothing was destroyed. And then Krishna explained to him, he said, "You've learned in the scriptures about morality. Why are you harboring such anger against the Pandavas? Because in reality, everything that happened was because of your mistake. Myself, Vidur, Drona, Bhishma, Sanjay, we all gave you advice, yet you ignored it. And as a king, you failed, because a king who just counts on his own judgment will have to suffer. Bhima correctly killed your son because that son of yours dragged Draupadi into the assembly of men while gambling. And both his and your antagonism towards them caused this. So govern your anger, control your anger." And when Dhritarashtra heard this from Krishna, he was ready to forgive. He said, "It is just as you say, O Madhav. I've been deviated from virtue by a father's affection. I'm no longer angry. Let me embrace both Bhima and Arjuna in love. With all my sons dead, my happiness now depends on Pandavas, who are no less to me than my own sons." And here's the ultimate statement he makes. He said, "Alas, I've acted like an enemy to those whom I should have nurtured and protected." So in that act where Yudhishthira went and bowed down to Dhritarashtra and embraced him, and then how Dhritarashtra was able to let go of his feelings after Krishna spoke to him, an act of forgiveness occurred out of Yudhishthira's act of atonement toward Dhritarashtra. Then Dhritarashtra asked the Pandavas to go meet Gandhari, his wife, and the mother of Duryodhana and the 100 children that died. Before the Pandavas could go to Gandhari, Vyasadeva went to her first, because Vyasadeva was there as well. And being a great rishi and the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself, and the literary incarnation, he could see into the heart and minds of others. And understanding that she had also anger, he approached her. He said, "Do not harm the Pandavas, O Gandhari. Take this opportunity instead to exercise forgiveness." So this is what Mahabharata says. "Remember, O Queen, that because it was you who blessed Duryodhana with the statement, 'Victory always attends righteousness,' your words have not proven false, because certainly the Pandavas are endowed with virtuous qualities and they achieved victory. Cast away your poor desire, your evil desire." At that time, the Pandavas arrived before Gandhari and they offered their respect. They touched her feet one by one. You can imagine Gandhari's agony in losing her children. And Mahabharata described that she was shedding tears while she spoke to Vyasadeva, and she said, "I don't have any ill feelings towards the Pandavas, O great sage, but grief has shaken my heart. Surely my children, the Kauravas, were puffed up with pride and arrogance, and they have perished due to Duryodhana's folly and the foolishness of all of his advisors. I don't blame the Pandavas, but they've done something I cannot accept. Because Bhima struck my son down with an unfair blow, as you all recall, Bhima struck Duryodhana on his thigh, and that was the cause of Duryodhana's death. Surely this was not consistent with virtue." Bhima had seen and learned from that Gandhari had tremendous mystic power because of her chastity towards her blind husband. And that she had taken most of her mystic power and endowed it onto Duryodhana. And that's what protected Duryodhana through the battle, according to Mahabharata. So Bhima said to Gandhari, he said, "Whether the blow was fair or not, it was the only way your son could be killed, because she had given him this potency that nothing else would kill him with his protective armor. Surely you know this, O Queen Gandhari. That sinful prince acted treacherously to us without thought of virtue on so many occasions. So he deserved to be slain by whatever means possible. Because without slaying him, there was no way that Yudhishthira could have become the righteous ruler of the kingdom. Therefore, I did what was in my power and defeated him in battle, exactly as I had promised. Were I not restrained by Yudhishthira, I would have done that long ago on the day he insulted Draupadi at the gambling match." Can you all hear me still? Narottam Vilas Prabhu?
Yes, Prabhu, we can hear you, Prabhu.
Thank you. Bhima, in his heart, knew what the real reason for killing Duryodhana in that way with a low blow. That he knew that was not sinful. Why? Because Krishna had ordered it. Krishna was the one, after all, who advised him to do it. And he knew that all action, when it pleases Krishna, gives his pleasure, that action cannot be sinful. But notice Bhima's sensitivity, oftentimes he's just kind of like a huge, strong person rushing into things, but he knew that Gandhari's faith in Krishna was not the same as his own. So Bhima didn't present her with that reason because he knew it would just diminish whatever respect she had for Krishna. So Gandhari started weeping again, thinking of her sons. And all of her maidservants came to support her because she was very frail as a result of all this. But she said, "Oh, Bhima, could you not have spared even a single one of our sons? How will we live? How would we survive without support in this world? She said, "Where is Yudhishthir? I wish to address the eldest Pandava." So here's another act of atonement by Yudhishthir towards somebody that he transgressed against, which is Gandhari. So with Mahabharata describes that Yudhishthir approached Gandhari with his palms folded and said, "Here he is," meaning he's speaking about himself. He's not speaking with somebody else. "Here he is, O Queen, the cruel destroyer of your sons. I deserve your curse, for I am the root cause of this great. Curse me at once. I don't care for the kingdom, wealth, or even life. By bringing the slaughter of kinsmen and friends, I have proven myself as one who hates the family." Gandhari, when she heard this, she fought to control her anger. Because in her heart, she knew of her son's weakness and her son's sinful quality and her husband's weakness. And she remembered Vyasadev's words about virtue and victory. So she restrained herself from uttering a curse. This was just by Yudhishthir's behavior. Because she saw that Yudhishthir felt more than enough remorse and pain. Mahabharata makes that point. But in her back of her heart, she had great resentment for what Bhima did when he killed, the two older sons. So she felt but Gandhari was always blindfolded as an act of chastity towards her husband. But she felt her eyes burning with anger. And she had used most of her mystic power in blessing Duryodhana. But it wasn't completely exhausted. So she just barely lifted the blindfold and looked down at Yudhishthir's feet. And when she glanced down at Yudhishthir's toes were perfectly beautifully manicured nails. And when she did that, his feet, his toes in particular, immediately turned dark and brown. All of them. And Mahabharata describes that all the Pandavas, when they saw this, they immediately stepped back behind Krishna to get Krishna's protection. But Yudhishthir himself did not react. And because of that, Gandhari regained her control and extended her gift of acceptance towards Yudhishthir. And she spoke then kindly to the brothers, the remaining Pandavas. And she forgave them. But she felt she still, it's not easy to let go. So she began to think of Krishna at that point. She knew that Krishna had tried to bring about peace, but she understood that Krishna was the Supreme Personality of Godhead and that nothing was beyond his capabilities. And even the rishis said that the destruction of the warriors was by Krishna's divine arrangement, because Krishna himself said that to Arjuna. So then she asked Krishna to come before him. And Gandhari said to him, "The Pandavas and the Kauravas have been destroyed, O Krishna, even before your eyes. Why were you indifferent to them? You could have prevented this massive slaughter. O Madhav, since you deliberately allowed this universal destruction, you should now feel the consequences. By whatever little merit I have acquired by serving my husband, I curse you. Since you callously allowed the Kurus and Pandavas to kill one another, so you will be the destroyer of your own kinsmen, the Yadus and the Vishnus. O Govinda, on the 36th year from now, your family members will kill each other in a battle between themselves. and you will finally die yourself. Thus, the ladies of your family will weep like our ladies are doing right now. And Krishna, just watch Krishna's action. Krishna bowed his head to her. And he said, "Your words will be true, O chaste lady. There are none in this world who can exterminate the Vrishnis and the Yadavas." That's Krishna's clansmen. In delivering this curse, you have assisted me. Because I was wondering how to take my clansmen, my kinsmen, back out of this world, because they're so powerful that nothing can kill them. Neither the Devatas nor the Asuras can kill them. So by uttering this curse, they will slay each other. And of course, the Pandavas were there and they heard this. And they just looked at each other silently, because the thought of Krishna departing, the ever well-wisher in 36 years, was unbearable for the Pandavas. It was something that they could not fathom. And then Gandhari was finally totally empty of her anger towards the Pandavas and to Krishna. So another act of atonement and an act of forgiveness. After that, Gandhari asked them, the Pandavas, and I'll fast forward to this, to meet Kunti. And they met Kunti, and then Kunti explained to the Pandavas how Karna was their elder brother, and until then, they did not know it. Only Gandhari and Karna and Krishna knew that relationship. And when Yudhishthira heard this, of course, he immediately started crying, because it's his brother that he and his own brothers, the Pandavas, killed. So Narad was also there. And Narad told Yudhishthira, don't give way to sorrow. You righteously acquired being the ruler of the world. You have to abide by your duty and go ahead and rule the world. You should rejoice. It's your rightful position, and you should follow the path of virtue. But Yudhishthira did not feel happy, of course. And what his mother told him about Karna compounded the feelings he had on so many people dying. Because Mahabharata describes that Yudhishthira cared for people like a loving father. And he viewed that there were all these women and children that had no father, no husband, no son. And he said to Narad and to others, he said, I've conquered the world by relying on Krishna and by the might of Bhima and Arjuna and the Brahmins' favor. Still, a heavy sorrow is on my mind. I've killed my kinsmen only because I wanted the kingdom. Those gentle ladies' grief cuts my heart. Due to me, so many women are in the same state as Subhadra lost, Abhimanyu. How can I possibly enjoy this earth? And he started blaming himself for being a Kshatriya, because the Kshatriya lifestyle in those days was violent and angry. They engaged in battle. Mahabharata makes a key point that although Duryodhana had carried out his duties very faithfully, his nature was that of a Brahmin rather than a Kshatriya. You can see that in Yudhishthira's every act. He was much more Brahminical than he was a Kshatriya. Arjuna said to Yudhishthira, how can you speak such words? You've conquered our enemies. You're now the world's rightful king. You're a Kshatriya. It's your duty to protect the people. renouncing the world and living like an ascetic and being poverty-stricken is fitting for a rishi, but not for kings. Kings have to perform sacrifice and distribute the consequent wealth to those in need, because a pious king increases the virtue and well-being of the entire population. And our world needs a leader like that. It is your religious obligation to fulfill that role. But Yudhishthira remained silent. He wasn't convinced. He said, I cannot accept your praise of wealth. My desire is to give up materialistic life and live like a poverty-stricken person. From now on, I will only take what is absolutely necessary to survive, passing my time in austerity and meditation. While I'm contemplating such a life, I feel happiness because of detachment. See what Mahabharata said? That his nature was not Kshatriya-like, his nature was Brahmin. Let me go to the forest and aim for the supreme spiritual world. So he said that to Arjuna and to the others. And then Bhima spoke to his elder brother and said, O king, if one can attain perfection simply by renunciation, then even the mountains and trees would be perfected beings. They all lead lives of abstention. They don't harm anyone and they practice celibacy. His point is that that's not enough because they don't become perfect as a result of that. Bhima said to Yudhishthira, real renunciation means performing one's duty as the Supreme Lord desires. The world moves with all beings acting according to their God-given nature. One who abstains from action cannot achieve success. Yudhishthira didn't break his silence. He said nothing. He already knew all this, his Dharma personified, but his heart was not inclined towards ruling. He thought of, at that point, Mahabharata describes that Yudhishthira started thinking of Bhishma lying on a battlefield with a bed of arrows, and Drona and Karna and how they were killed, and Abhimanyu, Draupadi's sons. He felt that if he had given up his desire for half the kingdom, none of them would have died. And Vyasadeva also spoke finally to Yudhishthira and told him about the duties of a Kshatriya, that if a kingdom went unprotected, then the people would suffer more. And that was his function, to rule and protect. And he could only take renunciation at the end of his life. And because Vyasadeva, being who he is, Yudhishthira didn't want to disobey him. So he said to Vyasadeva that, my lord, the thought of being the ruler with all its objects of enjoyment does not give me joy. I'm still grieving. Hearing the cries of these women, remember all the women that approached him in the very beginning and chastised him very strongly? I cannot feel peace. And he started crying and looked at Vyasadeva and said, I'm a most sinful person. See my heart, which is full of ignorance. My body is meant for serving others, but I've killed so many. Even if I live for millions of years, so this was in Mahabharata, this is recounted in Srimad Bhagavatam in the previous verses we read. Even if I live for millions of years, I will not be relieved from the hell that awaits me for these sins. There's no sin. So listen to this carefully. Although there's no sin for a king who kills to maintain his citizens for some other righteous cause, this injunction does not apply for my case. Why? Why did Yudhishthira say that? He said for a king that it's acceptable that they have to kill to maintain his citizens. But he said this rule does not apply for me. And the reason he said that was because Yudhishthira knew that that was not a sinful activity for a king. But he himself was not the king when he fought. See, Yudhishthira knows the subtleties of Dhamma and the rule and the details. And then at that point, he said this particular verse that we just read. When he explained this to Vyasadeva, he said, "The path of sacrifice will not save me from hell, which now awaits me, as it is not possible to filter muddy water through mud or purify a wine-stained pot with wine. It is not possible to counteract the killing of men by sacrificing animals." That's this verse that we're supposed to speak on. And Krishna saw that Yudhishthira is just going deeper and deeper into sadness. So he took Yudhishthira's hands and said, "Do not grieve. You won't do well with this if you continue this, even for your own well-being. Those that have lost their lives cannot come back by your grief. That by laying down their bodies, they've ascended to heaven. And their wives and family members should rejoice." Yudhishthira heard this, but it wasn't impacting. So he looked back at Vyasadeva and he said, "Oh, great Rishi, it is true that one who performs his duties with scriptural injunctions does not accrue sin. But it's the sins that I've already committed that burn and consume me." Meaning, he understands that going forward, he can think like that, but what about stuff that he's just done? I've committed genocide and I will fall into hell. I think the best atonement, you notice the word atonement, is by abstaining from food and drink and reducing my body until I leave my body. Then I can be released. Vyasadeva said, "Men like you cannot go to hell because you followed a very supreme path." Now, Bhagavatam says something very wonderful that Vyasadeva said. Vyasadeva said, "Sometimes virtue appears like sin, while at other times sin resembles virtue. Only those that are very learned know the difference. Sometimes virtue appears like sin, and other times sin resembles virtue. Even if there are some irregularities on the battlefield, you should not fear. Only he who deliberately sins without compunction or regret is bound by that sin and falls into hellish conviction." So, he's saying that you did not deliberately sin without regret. You had regret. This was not your mood. You only fought with reluctance, and now you're repentant. That repentance will purify you. So we talked about this when we talked initially about atonement has to have that component. Still, if you desire, you can do acts of atonement. You may perform the funeral services for the kings. And so Yudhishthira asked him more about this, and he said, Vyasadeva said, "If you wish to hear of morality and of duties of king, you should approach Bhishma. There's no one who exceeds his knowledge in this regard, because he was instructed by Brihaspati as well as Vashisht, and he had also heard from Markandeya Rishi, Parashuram, and even Indra, because Bhishma, if you remember, went up to a heavenly planet and instructed Indra. So surely Bhishma will clear your doubts. Go to him where he lies on the battlefield, for his time of death has not yet come." And soon as he said that, hearing Bhishma's name, Yudhishthira started, tears were springing from his eyes, because he said, "How will I approach my grandfather after I've killed him so deceitfully?" Krishna reassured Yudhishthira and said, "You should do what Vyasadeva suggested. Go to Bhishma and hear from him about your duties, because your doubts will be cleared by that great man, and you can then satisfy the Brahmins and your brothers and become the king." And so ultimately what happened after that is they all went back to Hastinapur. Krishna, the Pandavas, Dhritarashtra, Gandhari, Kunti Devi. And at that point, Yudhishthira was installed as the king. I'm fast forwarding. And people were praising him, worshiping him. And listen to this statement that he made soon as he came up to the royal throne. He said, I don't feel worthy of such words of praise. King Dhritarashtra is, however, our father and our God. If you wish to please me, obey him and do what he desires. He's the master of the world, of you and me. Do not treat him differently than you did in the past. So you see that Yudhishthira didn't just have feelings of regret and remorse and repentance when he approached Dhritarashtra. He actually did an act. He asked everybody to treat Dhritarashtra like the king, not himself. So I'll fast forward. And then the morning after Yudhishthira was installed as a king, he started thinking of Bhishma and approached Krishna. And this is really beautiful. He found Krishna in Arjun's palace. Krishna, Mahabharata says, was darkish hued. He was in yellow silk, and he was sitting on a sofa that was filled with gems, and he was wearing a sapphire that was set in gold, just to make you contemplate Krishna. Yudhishthira said, O foremost of all intelligent personalities, have you rested? Are you reinvigorated? O divine Lord, by your favor we've regained the world and have not transgressed the duties of our order. See, Yudhishthira is starting to absorb the forgiveness from Dhritarashtra and from all the other saintly personalities. Tell me now what should be done. But Krishna made no reply. He appeared to be in meditation. Now, we see all these, sometimes impersonalists have these posters of Krishna in like yogic pose, but devotees of Krishna, that's not how they see Krishna. But Yudhishthira saw this and he said, wonderful is it, O you of immeasurable power, that you're so wrapped in meditation. I'm seeing that you've withdrawn yourself from the world and adopted absorption in the self. I'm filled with wonder. If I'm fit to understand this cause of why your body is as still, immobile like a rock, and why your hair is standing on your body, then, O Govinda, please tell me. Please listen to this with your heart now. Krishna came back to external consciousness. People, and replied, that foremost of men, just close your eyes and think of this. That foremost of men, Bhishma, Krishna is saying this, now lies on a bed of arrows and is like a fire about to be extinguished. And he's thinking only of me. Thus my mind is also concentrated on him. My mind is fixed in him. I was wrapped in thought of Bhishma, who fought for 23 days with Parashuram before Parashuram finally admitted that he could not defeat his own greatest disciple. Concentrating his mind and controlling his senses, focusing on me, Ganga's son, Bhishma Dev was the son of Mother Ganga, seeks my refuge. It is for this reason that I fixed my mind on him. So Krishna explained why he was in meditation, because Bhishma was meditating on Krishna and fixing his mind with everything on Krishna. Krishna was doing likewise. This shows us Krishna's nature. Krishna told Yudhishthira that Bhishma would soon depart. Forgive me, dear devotees, I'm going on and on. If you want to drop out, you can. I respect your time. So he said, Bhishma would soon depart. He told this to Yudhishthira, this world. And that the Pandavas should leave at once to see him. When that great man leaves, Krishna said, when that great man leaves, so will all knowledge about morality and duty leave with him. No one can deliver instructions on this comparable to him, not even me. So they went out of the Hastinapur palace, mounted their chariots, and they arrived at Kurukshetra. And they saw the scene of this terrible 18-day war, because the field was littered with wreckage of weapons, chariots, dead animals. The bones looked like, Mahabharata says, like conches. They were white. Eventually they came not next to Bhishma, but they came in Bhishma, because Bhishma was surrounded by all these great rishis, and you will hear about that. The Mahabharata says that Bhishma's body was like shining like the sun that was setting. They could see him, the Pandavas and Krishna could see him from a great distance. And so then they immediately got off their chariots because of who he is. And they approached Bhishma on foot. And Krishna and the Pandavas offered their respect to the rishis, and they took seats around Bhishma, who lay perfectly still on the arrow bed. Krishna started crying when he saw Bhishma. And Krishna said, "Oh hero, is your mind and understanding still clear? Now as before. I hope you're not overwhelmed with pain or grief." Krishna called him, "Oh hero. Surely it is wonderful that you have been able to maintain your life in such a condition. There's nobody else in the world that could do this. I've heard, nor have I heard of anyone as devoted to truth, penance, charity, sacrifice, and virtue like you. None can equal you in prowess nor in your knowledge for the Vedas or morality." Krishna then asked Bhishma to remove Yudhishthira's. He said, "Dispel the sorrow of Pandu's oldest son. He's distracted by grief because so many of his kinsmen were slain in battle." See, Srimad Bhagavatam doesn't go over this, even though Vyasadeva wrote both things. Mahabharata explained this beautifully. It's like a background story that you don't hear. Other than you, none can destroy the doubts that have arisen within Yudhishthira about duty, because people like you live only for others' benefit. People like you only live for others' benefit. Please comfort Pandu's virtuous son, whose mind is heavy with anguish. So Bhishma raised his head a little and looked into Krishna's face. He said, "Obeisance to you, O divine Krishna. You are the creator and destroyer of all things. Everything material and spiritual emanates from and rests upon you eternally. I can see your universal form now." See, so Krishna allowed him to see that, even though nobody else there was seeing it. "With all its divine attributes, I take refuge in you, O Lord. I beseech your mercy. Tell me, O powerful Supreme Person, what will be best for me. I desire only to reach your spiritual abode." So Krishna started stroking Bhishma's head. And he said, "I know of your devotion to me, O foremost of men. Therefore, I've allowed you to see my divine form, which is only revealed to my most devoted servants. You are pure-hearted and have never swayed in your faith or love. You will therefore attain that place where nobody returns from. 56 days of your life remain, after which you will undoubtedly come to me. When the sun travels to the north, you will quit your body, taking your extensive knowledge. Therefore, we all have come to hear from you. Be pleased to speak and remove Yudhishthira's grief." After Krishna stroked Bhishma's elevated head, Bhishma's head fell back and he closed his eyes, and his face was covered with tears. And of course, the Pandavas, when they saw that, were filled with grief to see him so pained. Bhishma said, "O great one, O Narayan, O Lord of all worlds, my heart is filled with joy upon hearing your word," because Krishna told him, "You're going to come back after 56 days without doubt to me. But how can I say anything in your presence? You are the reservoir of knowledge. He who can speak on heaven before Indra," he's talking about himself, because Bhishma spoke to Indra about morality and duty in Krishna's presence in the past. How I'm in too much pain. Additionally, I'm in too much pain. I'm weak and can barely speak. My strength is leaving me. My understanding is clouded. I can hardly discern anything. It's only through your power that I'm living. You should therefore speak for Yudhishthira's benefit and the benefit of the world. How can I speak as I'm your disciple before my Guru? Krishna smiled and said, "Your words become you, O powerful one. You are a great soul and the greatest of all the Gurus." So Krishna then said something amazing to Bhishma. He said, "Regarding your pain, hear the boon I grant you out of my love. From now until you die," remember he said 56 days, "from now until you die, you will be free of pain, hunger, thirst, and bewilderment. Your perception and memory will remain unclouded, and your mind will be peaceful. Your knowledge will be as clear to you as fishes are in a clear lake. Therefore, you will be able to answer all of Yudhishthira's questions." By that time, the sun was setting after all this conversation between Krishna and Bhishma. And so everybody went back to their place of rest, and Bhishma remained on the battlefield. Next morning, they went back, and Mahabharata describes there were, at this point, hundreds of great saintly personalities, rishis, that were surrounding Bhishma. And they stood aside. So like I said, dear devotees, if you have to leave, whatever reason you're tired, etc., please go ahead and leave. I'm just speaking for my own purification. So hundreds of rishis stood aside to allow Yudhishthira and his companions to approach. And the Pandavas saw that, the greatest of all sages had arrived. There was Narad, Vyasadeva, Bharadvaj, Parashram, Gautama, Kashyapa, Angira Muni. They were all there. Bhishma in his life had received all these sages and worshipped them appropriately. So he also greeted them and the Pandavas and Krishna as they sat around him. Krishna asked Bhishma, "How are you feeling?" Bhishma said, "Oh Madhav, by your grace, my mind is perfectly calm and clear. I see all things, past, present, and future, as clearly as I would if I held a fruit in my hand. Soon I will depart from this world thinking only of you, O Govinda." So, Krishna upheld his word. He made all the pain and suffering go away, and he made all Bhishma's mind clear by his boon. The Pandavas were filled with affection seeing their grandfather. And Bhishma felt the same thing towards them. And while crying, he said, "My dear son Yudhishthira, what injustices you have all suffered, even though you're the son of religion personified, only because you were protected." So these are three things that he's instructing him. Only because you were protected by Brahmins, religion, and Supreme Lord. So Srimad Bhagavatam chapter 9 will have this verse. Only because you were protected by Brahmins, religion, and Supreme Lord himself did you manage to survive. So this is what the Bhagavatam is going to tell us. The true atonement involves pure knowledge. So watch how Bhishma gives Yudhishthira this pure knowledge. So Bhishma turned his head and fixed his gaze on Krishna. And he said, while looking at Krishna, but speaking to Bhishma, to Yudhishthira, he said, Bhishma Dev said, it is this divine and unknowable Krishna who controls everything. Time is simply his energy. Surely even the greatest rishis and sages cannot understand this. They cannot understand his plans. They remain bewildered. I therefore maintain that all this destruction is within the Supreme Lord's plan. Accepting his inconceivable will, you must follow it. You are now the appointed head of the state, and you should take care of those subjects who have been rendered helpless as a result of this battle. Bhishma knew that the argument that would most effectively get Yudhishthira out of his remorse and to do his convince Yudhishthira to do his duty. So that's where he was approaching with knowledge. He knew that the Pandavas were devoted to Krishna, but because of their intense, intimate love for Krishna, it made them forget that he was the supreme controller of all events. Bhishma understood that. He was simply reminding Yudhishthira of what he already knew, but because of Yudhishthira's great love for Krishna, Yudhishthira didn't see that. He knew that if the Pandavas became convinced that the war and its outcome had been Krishna's own plan, then they wouldn't hesitate to do their kingly duty. So he continued to look at Krishna as he said, this Govinda, he's speaking to Yudhishthira and the Pandavas, but he said, this Govinda is none other than the original powerful person. From him comes Narayan and all other deities. So Bhishma is confirming that Krishna is the source of all avatars. Still, he has appeared amongst the descendants of the Vrishnis and moves around this world like one of us. So he bewilders us by his own self-created energy. And then he turned his face back towards Yudhishthira and he said, O king, only great personalities like Shiva and Narad know about Krishna's confidential glories by their relationship with him. My dear child, Yudhishthira, that personality whom out of ignorance you thought to be your cousin, your dear friend, your well-wisher, is in fact the Supreme Lord of the entire material and spiritual creation. Bhishma was described Krishna even greater. For the sake of time, I won't extend. But he became overcome by spiritual ecstasy when he was describing Krishna. And tears, Mahabharata describes that tears were flowing down his eyes. And Yudhishthira, Mahabharata explains, took a cloth and wiped Bhishma's face. And then Bhishma says, that very Krishna has graciously come before me while I'm ending my life, for I am his unflinching servant. That supreme person who appears in the mind by attentive devotion and meditation releases the devotee when he leaves his material body. May my Lord, who is four-handed, who is beautifully decorated lotus face with eyes as red as the rising sun, await me at the final moment of my life. When Bhishma said that, it touched the hearts of everybody who was there, Mahabharata describes. And Krishna returned Bhishma's affectionate gaze and raised his hands, blessing Bhishma. Then Krishna nodded towards Yudhishthira and indicating to Yudhishthira that he could ask Bhishma his doubts. So Yudhishthira asked him about the religious principles and duties and all that Bhishma had learned. Bhishma explained to Yudhishthira about acts of charity, a king's practical duties. And he satisfied Yudhishthira. And this went on for, Mahabharata says, for 50 days, he explained to Yudhishthira. So Yudhishthira ended his instructions to Bhishma ended his instruction. Yudhishthira thought about departing, and Bhishma withdrew his mind from everything else and fixed his eyes upon Krishna. So you can see how everything was orchestrated so that ultimately Yudhishthira would meet Bhishma, and because Yudhishthira's great Bhishma's great act of forgiveness for what Yudhishthira and the Pandavas did towards him, that Bhishma was able to embed within Yudhishthira the understanding of who Krishna really is, and that Kurukshetra was Krishna's desire, that battle, and Yudhishthira was simply playing a role. So then Yudhishthira's doubts and uncertainty went away. So Yudhishthira fixed his mind upon Krishna, who stood before him, and Krishna was actually displaying to Yudhishthira his four-handed form with yellow garments. And Bhishma then stopped his senses and started praying to the Lord. He said, let me invest my thinking, feeling, which are so long engaged in so many subjects, onto you, onto the all-powerful Krishna. This is beautiful. He describes this. He says, Krishna has appeared on earth in his transcendental body, which is blue like a tamal tree. May his lotus face, decorated with sandalwood pulp, be the constant object of my attraction, and may I not desire any material benefits from my acts. Bhishma continued, on the battlefield, Krishna drove the chariot of his intimate friend Arjuna, his hair colored ash due to dust. Beads of sweat were on his face, and he enjoyed these decorations intensified by my sharp arrows. Let my mind be fixed upon him. Just like Krishna enjoyed showing his love to Arjuna by assisting him, he also, Mahabharata said, had a similar reciprocation with Bhishma. We know about this. So the sun was reaching its height, and Bhishma knew his departure was near because he was endowed with that clarity because of the boon Krishna gave him. So the Mahabharata says he cleared his mind, absorbed his thoughts on Krishna alone. He said, I can now meditate with full concentration upon that one Lord, Lord Krishna, visible before me because I have transcended duality. Even though the sun may be perceived in different people in different parts, the sun is one. I therefore surrender myself to him, to that all-powerful, all-present Lord. And then he says, his last sentence was, may all be well with the worlds. And then he fell silent and stopped breathing. And Mahabharata describes that suddenly his life air shot from the top of his head and went into the sky. And this is like in midday. It went into the sky like a blazing comet. And all the rishis could see that Bhishma left his body, and in his brilliant spiritual form, he entered into Krishna. And Mahabharata Vyasadeva describes that Bhishma went into Krishna's loving pastimes. And then everybody became silent, and Yudhishthira started ruling the earth. And then I will end. So it's 9:17. I'm sorry for taking up all this time, but I hope that hearing about Yudhishthira and his genuine nature of atonement and those of the great personalities like Dhritarashtra, Gandhari, Bhishma, and how all the great sages and the rishis and Krishna and then finally Bhishma himself were able to put Yudhishthira's mind at ease that this is the real process of atonement that comes from genuine, sincere desire to heal the hurt and an act of atoning, and on the part of the victim, an act of forgiveness. So There's much to be said about atonement. If you want to read more about this, please read Canto 6, Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, because Parikshit Maharaj asked the question of Prayaschitta, but we don't have time at this point. So thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Thank you very much. Any questions, comments, additions that you would like to speak about? Sorry, I know it took a lot of time, but we don't normally read Mahabharata. Okay. Thank you very much. Please join us for